Tell me what you think.
Major Beisel here. Got a situation developing. The nobles are getting desperate. They want off this world. They're heading for the spaceport with their bodyguards. Figure they can fight through the rat ghouls and get a ship. We can't let them break quarantine. I'm sending my patrols to the spaceport. Meet us there.
That's what you wanted.
We're too late. The nobles got their hands on a shuttle. They're breaking the quarantine. squad's heading to the crash site to look for survivors. Meet us there.
Optimal outcome achieved.
Doreen Levesque. Raposa's hands had been tied together, and her skull had been crushed. Over time, investigators learned that members of a local prostitution ring were also participating in satanic rituals.
Detective Alan Sylvia from Fall River and Paul Carey, they did most of that investigation.
In November of 1979, law enforcement officials received multiple leads from several prostitutes that the satanic cult was conducting rituals over the Freetown State Forest in the Fall River housing project. Soon after, Carey and his partner went undercover and attended a satanic ritual in the Fall River apartment building. The ritual involved bizarre chanting, cries of Hail Satan. Carey learned that 17-year-old pimp and prostitute Robin Murphy and 25-year-old pimp Carl Drew were human followers of bizarre satanic rites. Eventually, Carey interviewed another local prostitute, Marston. Marston stated that both Carl Drew and Robin Murphy had ritualistically murdered Doreen Levesque and Barbara Raposa. Weeks later, Karen Marsden failed to meet with Carey for a follow-up interview. 6 months later, her skull was found badly beaten in nearby Westport, Massachusetts. Near the skull, police discovered a clump of the victim's hair, along with cat skulls and sheep bones. In 1980, Carl Drew and Robin Murphy were arrested in connection with the string of murders. In the case of Karen Marsden, Murphy pled guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange for a
Spread out. Check for survivors.
Major, we got a live one. Hey, you all right?
Major, look out! Oh!
Those things would have torn me to pieces. You saved my life. Never thought I'd be glad to see the Empire on Kaon.
Don't let your prejudices blind you to the benefits the Empire can bring you.
Those prejudices run pretty deep here on Kaon. Truth be told, a lot of people on Kaon actually blame the Empire for this outbreak. They figure an infected ship was intentionally sent here to destabilize the system.
What kind of evidence do you have? Or are you just throwing around wild theories?
I'm just telling you what I heard. Doesn't seem that far-fetched, though. The Empire's done far worse in its day. But if you're not responsible, there's one way to prove it. Checking the records at the spaceport will show where the infected ship came from. Should tell us who's behind this, one way or another.
That should have been the first thing you did.
Our first priority was enforcing the quarantine. Couldn't let this spread. But I've got patrols headed to the spaceport now. Maybe we'll get lucky and find some... Oh! My chest is on fire. Ah! No. It was just a scratch. Oh! One scratch can't turn me into... Oh! Please, do something.
This should be interesting.
Ah! I always knew you were... scum!
Patrol checking in. Still no enemy contact.
Life sentence with the possibility of parole, Murphy agreed to testify against Carl Drew in his upcoming trial. In 1982, Drew was convicted in the first degree for the murder of Karen Marsden. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Condemned by mainstream satanic religious organizations like the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, ritual sacrifice and criminal deeds in the name of Satan remain controversial subjects. Nevertheless, self-stylized Satanists ritualistically sacrificing animals and committing crimes in the name of the Dark Lord continued in the Freetown State Forest long after the arrests and convictions of Robin Murphy and Carl Drew. In some cases, it was difficult to determine whether hardline Satanists or curious, impressionable teenage youth carried out the subsequent activities. In the late 1980s, a series of grave robberies occurred involving small cemeteries in remote sections of the Freetown State Forest.
They would find out skulls and remains moving. At least 4 or 5 that I know of.
New England Paranormal Research founder and author John Brightman has been investigating strange occurrences in the Bridgewater Triangle for over a decade. Recently, Brightman published Dark Yet, a fictional novel based on his numerous investigations in the Freetown State Forest. Growing up in Princeton, Brightman is well acquainted with the many stories surrounding the State Forest region.
We're at Freetown Cemetery, right off of South Main Street here in Assonet, where this mausoleum behind me was broken into, and juveniles actually stole the head out of here.
They broke into the mausoleum, broke into the crypt. They removed the body from the crypt, the body of the female, and they cut the head off. They removed it and put it in the car, but as they were driving away, the smell was so bad that they ended up hiding in the bushes. We ended up arresting 3 juveniles that were involved in that break-in, and they told us they were using it to get into a cult.
When they were caught, the story that one of them told was that they believed that they could gain power by drinking the skull. The other 2 kind of were involved in a peripheral way. One of them said he was just along for the ride. The other one said that he believed in the occult and he thought that this would be kind of a cool thing to do. All of them have since said that there's no way they were involved in the occult at all and it was just kind of a kid's prank. But this is the kind of thing that happens in the state forest.
Obviously, it brought a lot of attention and people were coming here to check it and see what was going on. They decided to take off the metal gate door and actually brick it in so nobody could break into it ever again.
I'm your man.
We're here in the Freetown State Forest up at the Faxon Animal Rescue League Pet Cemetery. People that had put down their pets at Faxon would bring them up here to give them a proper burial. In the 80s, this was shut down because people that were part of cults or trying to get into cults were coming up here, digging up the animals' remains in turn to be able to use that during the rituals.
Many locations in and around the Freetown State Forest have long been associated with alleged satanic activity. 2 sites in particular have captured the imaginations of local residents. Swirling with rumors of child rape, animal sacrifice, and even ritualistic murder were a hidden underground bunker and a remote makeshift hut.
A hunter who was walking through the woods discovered an underground bunker. And what this was basically built into a hill. There was an underground lair. It was then covered with a blue tarp, and then of course all the stuff that you would naturally find in the forest. So unless you approached it from the right angle, you wouldn't be able to tell if there was anything at all.
Went it on one side, it was dropped down, and you could go inside. And it had some disturbing things in it. There's some dolls heads cut off, and little tiny trees that you could sit in and toss it out of a tree. I don't know who was there and so on.
It was very clear that whatever was working there was kind of connecting some kind of child abuse and perhaps child abduction with some kind of occult twist to it.
There wasn't anything of any evidentiary material there that you could trace back to any individual. Persons of interest told me about this hut that supposedly was in the woods that was used by people involved in the Fall River cult. Witnesses indicated that's where some of the rituals took place. We were led down there. It was at least a 2.5-mile walk into the woods. There we found the hut. We found all the trappings of satanic worship, the upside down pentagram, dolls nailed to the trees, and so forth. The parlor could have been used in the winter because it was made with very insulated material.
For over 2 decades, the exact locations of these satanic dens remained the subject of debate. However, in the fall of 2012, the producers of this documentary were successful in rediscovering the locations in question. Following a lead from Freetown resident Mike Fournier, the filmmakers were led to the collapsed remains of the notorious underground bunker.
I was walking out in the woods with my father. We came across this little hole in the ground. I remember walking in and seeing a big pentagram on the floor, and then 2 cots with a big fire pit right in the middle. It doesn't really look the same anymore, but this is definitely the spot.
Hidden away off on an old logging trail in the Freetown portion of the state forest, pieces of the barely recognizable bunker are still covered with faint traces of satanic graffiti. Shortly after finding the underground bunker, the filmmakers confirmed an approximate whereabouts of the infamous makeshift hut, commonly referred to as Carl Drew's shack. Based on information in a 1988 Standard Times article and leads from Alan Alves and a local Cranberry Bog employee, the collapsed remains of the hut were found in a remote section of dense woodlands just outside of the Freetown State Forest. For years, paranormal researchers, ghost tour patrons, and curious investigators have found numerous abandoned hunting cabins, ranger stations, and ice shacks, all of which were mistaken as either the underground bunker or makeshift hut. The 2012 expeditions to the areas in question helped to resolve any confusion regarding the definitive locations of these 2 renowned forest hideaways. And although both the bunker and hut are commonly associated with Carl Drew and the Fall River cult, a definitive link to the suspects in question has never been fully established. Also important to note is that no confirmed human victims of satanic ritualistic sacrifice have ever been discovered within either the boundaries of the Freetown State Forest or within the traditional borders of the entire 2-square-mile Bridgewater Triangle.
Myself and a state police canine unit wanted to bring the dogs in, go around to see if we could find the remains of any bodies buried in the state forest. We set up a couple of days to do that with the dogs, and then at the last minute, powers to be canceled the operation.
The majority of the cults that find their way here to the Freetown State Forest, whether they be labeled satanic or whether they be labeled something else, are not criminal in any way. It just seems to be that the more organized that cult becomes, the more likely that they are involved in kind of deeper, darker crimes.
Despite a lack of evidence for crimes involving human sacrifice in the Freetown State Forest, evidence of animal sacrifice was routinely discovered throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s.
What began in the forest as pigeons and small animals quickly moved up to larger animals until finally there were cow carcasses being found here.
In 1999, a dozen baby calves were slaughtered in a satanic ritual near the Dartmouth side of the forest.
A huge amount of calves. left in the middle of state forest was the absence of blood. And they used that blood in their sacrifices.
What that really signaled to people like Alan Alves and other law enforcement was that things were getting more serious, and that perhaps more organized, darker elements were finding their way into the forest.
The cattle mutilations of the late 1990s marked the last known instance of satanic ritual sacrifice in the Freetown State Forest. Although satanic-related crimes and activity often dominate headlines relating to the Freetown State Forest, the area has also been associated with a number of isolated crimes, odd occurrences, and paranormal activity. In 1978, the remains of 15-year-old Raynham resident Mary Lou Arruda were found tied to a tree in the forest.
Mary Lou Arruda was on her bicycle on a dirt road in Raynham, and she was on her bike and kidnapped, brought to the state forest in Freetown, and subsequently murdered. Her body was found 2 months later in November of '78 by 2 dirt bike riders. I said, we found a headless body tied to a tree. It was like a week after Halloween, so I figured it must be a dummy. And they brought me to the area. They wouldn't go near it. They pointed up there, and I walked up the hill, and sure enough, it was a headless body of a female tied to the tree.
Eventually, 32-year-old James Cater was tried and convicted of the kidnapping and murder. The death of Mary Lou Arruda is often confused with crimes committed by the Fall River Satanic Cult.
Although the James Cater case, Mary Lou Arruda case had absolutely nothing to do with a satanic crime, unfortunately her body was found near some of that activity.
His defense attorney basically put forth the theory that a cult had killed Arruda and not him. This kind of led to an attaching that he was perhaps involved in the cult, and that's what happened.
He appealed to several times, he got 3 or 4 in the trial, but he was life in prison.
Falsely accused of being a police officer, was murdered in the forest. In 2001, 2 men were found shot to death in a car on Bell Rock Road in the same region. In 2006, multiple strange incidents involving animals occurred in the forest, including the discovery of numerous abandoned dogs in various stages of aggression, and the reported sightings of an escaped wandering emu. As the site of a Wampanoag Indian reservation, and like many other locations within the Bridgewater Triangle, the Freetown State Forest boasts a long history of reported paranormal activity related to Native American legends. Elusive pukwudgies are said to roam the woods of the state forest. Pukwudgies are 3-foot-tall beings associated with Wampanoag folklore.
Pukwudgies were mischievous and caused the Wampanoags trouble, and everything that went wrong, it was because of the Pukwudgies. It predates the colonialization of the country. It predates even the kind of organizing of the Wampanoag tribe. And then somewhere in the Wampanoags' history, they take this very weird twist where they go from being troublemakers to being labeled as evil. And then eventually, when they begin Christianizing the Wampanoags, being talked of as the foot soldiers of the devil.
Humanistic in their features, Pukwudgies possess enlarged noses, fingers and ears, and smooth gray skin. Pukwudgies are also said to have magical powers, including the ability to disappear and the ability to glow in the dark.
They control these bursts of light, which are called Taipaiwunkas, which today we probably would refer to as orbs. But then they also seem to be controlled by this darker force, this almost shadow-like creature who seems to have control over them, or at least to be observing what they're doing. So I can always tell a Pukwudgie experience from something else because it has those different elements. They're never in isolation with each other.
Pukwudgie sightings in the Freetown State Forest share striking similarities with William Russo's unexplained creature encounter. Christopher Balzano's book Dark Woods features an eyewitness account from a woman named Joan who encountered an alleged Pukwudgie while walking her dog in the Freetown State Forest. Although William Russo's creature encounter took place 20 miles to the north of the Freetown State Forest in the Hockomock Swamp, some paranormal researchers are now wondering if Russo may have encountered a Pukwudgie. In May of 2008, a bizarre incident was caught on camera while filming a segment for Chris Balzano's book and DVD, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. The following clip features a woman named Maureen struggling with what some investigators claim was possession at the hands of a Pukwudgie.
Come on, Maureen, fight it.
Come on, Maureen.
Leave this fight! You need to leave this fight. It's not your own. Come here. Leave. Leave. There's a bastard. Send the whole front. Leave it. Leave it.
According to camera operator Andrew Lake, a strange light was later seen in the distance as Maureen recovered from the alleged attack. The ledge is arguably the most famous location within the Freetown State Forest. Outside the realm of Pukwudgie-related incidents, the site has been associated with a high volume of paranormal activity.
I was walking out onto the ledge, and I saw this woman in white standing out on the promenade. And I turned around to the people I was with to say, hey, we're not alone. Turned around, and she was gone. And at that first instant, I figured, oh, crap, she jumped. So I went running over to the edge to look down to find nobody. And the two town residents that have lived here all their lives were like, oh, you saw the lady of the ledge. And they proceeded to tell me this folklore about a woman who had committed suicide because her lover was supposed to meet her here.
It's one of those things where it makes for a really good backstory. We don't know whether the backstory is true, and it probably isn't, but it doesn't discount the fact that she's seen here.
Paranormal researchers routinely debate the validity of the Bridgewater Triangle's traditional borders.
The original boundaries, as described by Loren Coleman, made for a nice, tidy triangle based on his research. But in the years since, the more people have talked about the Bridgewater Triangle and the more that they've shared stories and experiences, we've seen that the triangle has to expand.
To me, the geographic boundaries of it are kind of a framework for looking at it and trying to identify areas within the triangle where anomalous phenomena are commonly reported. And certainly there are areas that are immediately adjacent to the boundaries of the Bridgewater Triangle that have a very high level of activity with a lot of sightings. But there are also areas within the established boundaries of the triangle where there's a very low level of activity.
It's not a completely straight line that defines this region. It spreads. And when you talk about legendary areas, it's always going to differ. You know, a legend may start in one little tiny parcel of land, but the sighting, the region is going to grow over time. It's just a natural process of legends. People have experienced it elsewhere, and it ties back to the original source.
Now it's to the point where I almost wonder if there even is a triangle anymore. That it's just never reached the pinnacle, that as each year passes and more activity takes place, more and more people are paying attention. Those tentacles just start to reach out further and further. Who knows, the Bridgewater Triangle could eventually encompass the entire world.
How the reported strange events within the Bridgewater Triangle, all tied together, remains another widely debated topic.
When I was first investigating the sightings here, it seemed to me like there would be so many Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings and ghosts and monsters and creatures and aliens. It had to be that the Bridgewater Triangle was some kind of a vortex or a portal. But you know, over the years I've kind of taken a different view of it, and now I think maybe it's just that in our 21st century lives, we're kind of divorced from the natural world around us in a lot of ways, and going into the Freetown State Forest, going into the wilderness of the Hockomock Swamp, there's something inside of us fun, maybe in a way that harkens back to our stone ancestors. And maybe that's what it's supposed to be.
Years ago, my brother and I went and stayed in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. And the shamans there believe that the jungle itself has a spirit, has a soul. And I think that the Hockomock is one of those places. I feel as though the Hockomock has its own soul. It's a very old soul, and it has a memory. And some of the things that it's experienced, such as King Philip's War, I feel as though it holds those memories. And every now and then, when someone goes out into the swamp, they experience something through the swamp.
I think that we've got something very unique going on in the Bridgewater-Hockomock area. And at least acknowledge. And it keeps our eyes and ears open to new stories that keep presenting themselves even when we don't want them necessarily.
When you're looking at the Bridgewater Triangle, nothing can be isolated. All of these things are interconnected, and that's really the initial force that drove Coleman. So for us to ever fully understand what's going on in the Bridgewater Triangle, we have to look at it through a cryptozoological lens. We have to look at it through a ufology lens. We have to look at it through a ghostly lens, because only when we kind of evaluated the area through all of those different perspectives, combine our evidence, combine what we found, and be open to the fact that those things might kind of all be playing on the same thing, that we're ever going to really understand what's going on in the triangle.
You can't look at the Bridgewater Triangle as just an area where there's paranormal activity. You have to look at the underlying layers of all the history, all of the geological factors, and the more people who are studying it, the more we're actually going to be documenting. So is it just a case of we're documenting more here because it's been brought into the limelight, or is it a case where there really is just more activity here for us to document?
The Bridgewater Triangle is definitely one of the most popular topics on our show. We can see the download numbers that spike when we talk about the Bridgewater Triangle. We can see the website hits that spike when we have triangle-related guests. It's amazing that for something that 10 years ago people might not have ever heard of, it's now becoming one of the preeminent paranormal stories in the world. I really modestly and humbly came up with this name, and I'm just as surprised 30 years later that it's such a worldwide phenomenon.
The Bridgewater Triangle, being an area filled with paranormal activity, obviously makes it very special, in my opinion. I know the Bermuda Triangle, everybody seems to know about that, so it would be nice if we could spread the word about the Bridgewater Triangle.
After all the investigations we've done here within the triangle and the photographs we've caught, as well as the disembodied voices on our EVP recorders, I do believe in the Bridgewater Triangle.
The Bridgewater Triangle is definitely a haunted location. Every time I record, there's always something that gets touched up and helps develop questions.
The Bridgewater Triangle is real. There's no question in my mind. The weirdest things happen here, the most unexplained things happen here. And you can feel it in that state forest. I dare anybody to go there, that middle of the state forest, at midnight, when it's dark. Tell me if you don't suspect something you don't know anywhere else. I can't be in the state forest at night, even when it's not uncomfortable in the state forest.
Whatever it is, we keep talking about this region for some reason. And the reason is something real happened here. There's no other way. You take away the real events, and it's just a story stories go.
I don't believe in the Bridgewater Triangle. Accept it.
If I must. Vaiwa Gabarain.
In the darkened woods near the top of the hill, which sits on the old Bailey Fisher farm, lurks a monster. One which waits for passerby behind shadowy trees. It is said to have come to the area from a faraway planet in a strange craft which landed on the hill one night long ago. The being on the hill emits a putrid smell and is always preceded by an acidic, foggy mist which can burn flesh from bone. If you're unlucky enough to find yourself on the hill after dark, you just might catch a glimpse of the monster wandering the forest, searching the skies for the rest of its kind.
Suerpos.
It is said that their return will spell the end of Flatwoods and the end of all humanity. In Braxton County, West Virginia, lies the village of Flatwoods. Whether whispered over morning coffee or told in hushed tones in school hallways, this is a place where tales are told. Often they tell of grisly murder in the streets of faraway cities or terrible accidents involving farm equipment. But just as often they tell of ghosts who wander abandoned homes, waiting to startle unsuspecting victims. Strange, hairy beasts are said to hide in the forested hills and hollers, occasionally lumbering out into the open long enough to chase fearful children who made the mistake of staying out at the curfew. On occasion, unearthly lights are spotted hovering in the skies over backwoods farmers' fields, just long enough to be seen before disappearing back to the distant regions whence they came. In a place like Flatwoods, stories become folk tales that are passed down from generation to generation like a family heirloom, rarely making their way out of the region they were birthed. Each retelling takes on new elements, new pieces of the puzzle, still being shaped by the passing years. With most legends, it seems there is one or many kernels of truth, key details that form the foundation of a story that has become something far different in the years that followed the occurrence. In the tale of the Green Monster, one of those details is the May family. Ed and Fred May were present for the birth of this particular mythology, and in the years since it was first told, they've come to play the most crucial role, witnesses to a legend.
Well, as far as myself, it doesn't make any difference. Whether people believe me or whether they don't.
No, but like I say, it's up to the individual whether they believe us or they either believe us or they don't believe us. It's immaterial to me.
The Mays lived in a small house just off Depot Street, named as such due to the proximity of the West Virginia and Pittsburgh Railroad line, which ran nearby. Their mother, Kathleen, was grown up in the area and was well known and liked by Flatwoods residents. She was a playful, feisty woman, more than capable of caring for herself and tender to her. The boy's father moved to Michigan shortly after their parents' divorce. To understand how the legend of the Green Monster began, it's best to understand the area where it happened. West Virginia is known for its Mothman, a creature seen during 1966 and 1967 in the town of Point Pleasant, a being that chased kids in cars and appeared at bedsides of terrified residents of the town, shortly before the collapse of a bridge and the loss of 46 lives. But the Braxton County Monster existed long before the Mothman rose to prominence. It makes a certain kind of sense that Braxton County birthed such a famous legend. Braxton County sits at the geographical center of the state, and with its high, misty, rolling forested hills, its shadowy hollers, and dark back roads, the county is covered in a blanket of mystery.
Braxton County contains incorporated towns of Flatwoods, Burnsville, Sutton, and Gasaway, along with numerous smaller unincorporated towns. There is about 50 miles or so of interstate that zigzags through Braxton
Green
County.
Patrol, all clear in our
Flatwood's
neck
a
of the woods.
nice country community that everybody knew everybody. It's back to the old country West Virginia home now, country roads.
I'm originally from one county over, and my whole family's from there. I have some brothers from here, and they've been here since as long as I can remember. Other than the occasional transplant, it's just people that's lived here their whole lives.
The exact date of the founding of Flatwoods is unknown, but history does tell us that a church was founded in the area as far back as 1830. In 1902, Flatwoods was incorporated, and thanks to the railroad, which was extended through town in the late 1800s, the town thrived. The nearby town of Sutton, West Virginia, plays a key part in regional tourism and features a historic district that houses the Braxton County Visitors Bureau, as well as the historic Sutton Lake and nearby Elk River. Despite its obvious beauty and a number of prominent figures who grew up within the county limits, it has become best known for a shadowy, monstrous creature that was merely a tourist. Away.
There was a lot of people that made light of the monster, laughed about it, made jokes about it. It was always in the background, always part of the folklore that a lot of small towns have. This monster business was a little more real than maybe some folklore in some towns, but it was interesting.
I knew about it, but even going through middle school and high school here, I'd always, you would hear it. You'd hear Flatwoods Monster or Braxton County Monster.
In small communities such as this, everybody knows everybody, or they have a
Green
family
Patrol,
member that
got a visual on
knows
the
somebody down
spaceport.
the road, or,
No signs of life.
whatever the case
We're
may
going
be.
in.
My family grew up in this general area. They were so terrified of the Flatwoods Monster that they were afraid to walk home from the school bus.
It seems like if you're from Flatwoods, you really know a lot about it. But if you're not, or if you didn't go to like the elementary school in Flatwoods, you might not know that much about it, which is a shame.
The author of this book, Annapolis-trained ex-Marine Major Donald Kehoe, says the saucers are not from this earth, that they far outperform any craft that man can build today.
After a 1 year's investigation, I believe that the flying saucers, seen by veteran airline and Air Force
The
pilots,
Green Monster legend was born in September of 1952, perhaps not coincidentally, at a time when alien-like craft and spaceborne monsters were in the public consciousness. Just 5 years prior, a pilot named Lieutenant Arnold had sighted 9 unusual flying-sided planes, which reminded him of saucers skipping on water. Over the following months, the term flying saucers would grow prominent while aliens and their transportation invaded pop culture. With the coming of a new era of film, so came the introduction of alien menaces. Science fiction films became the go-to genre, and each was centered around seemingly more and more bizarre creatures from the skies. Overseas, America was still entrenched in the Korean War, and while at home, fears of communism and nuclear annihilation were part of everyday life. As the world became an increasingly fearful place, eyes turned to the skies overhead. For centuries, West Virginia residents have been recounting unusual aerial phenomena across the state. In 1950, a supposed UFO sighting occurred in nearby Mount Hope, West Virginia. Meanwhile, in neighboring states, including Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, sightings were being reported by civilians and military personnel alike.
back then, if something happened to me, my grandmother always said that, you know, we're up on a ridgetop and they can watch us easier than they can anywhere else. And they know that people up here are not going to talk.
This whole area has had many reports of UFOs, even dating back to the 1800s. The whole state of West Virginia. One particular account happened in 1944 where a farmer reported finding all this wreckage on his property that wasn't normal material. And after telling his relatives and his family about what he had found, no one really showed much interest. So he simply buried it in the same gully where he buried his trash.
We do have the advantage of having pretty clear night skies. We have the opportunity to see strange things that may take place in the sky that others might not see.
My grandfather was on his way back to Ohio one night because he worked in Ohio at the time, and he saw a teardrop fall from the sky. It was huge. It looked like jelly or jello. They saw like this cigar-shaped UFO. She said it came right down to the house and took off over the hilltop. They used to see a huge red bouncing ball, what looked like it would bounce across the sky. They'd see lights coming out the cemetery. One night my Uncle Audie was staying with her and they heard a noise over the hilltop. They thought it was somebody messing with something. And he went out and just fired a shotgun up into the sky. And his saucer rose and took off.
On September 13th and 14th, 1952, two pilots both recounted seeing a large, unknown craft streak past their planes. In Charleston, a United States Air Force B-29 bomber crew reported sightings of what appeared to be a fleet of bright, metallic objects racing past their planes for up to 15 minutes. None of this would have proven all that unusual to the residents of the Flatwoods area. Reports of strange activity in the hills around Braxton County and neighboring areas were so common that residents barely noticed them.
My grandmother's name was Audrey Harper. She was going through an old box of papers, and she said, "Oh, look at this." She said, "You need to read this." I said, "What is it?" She said, "Well, I read it when I was about your age." It's 3 pages that she typed on an old-fashioned typewriter, and it was just the stories that she had experienced. Back then, the roads were dirt, and they get rutted, and you couldn't get a car out. So you'd have to walk to the store 5 or 6 miles. She said it wasn't dark yet, it was about twilight, and her friend were going to the store. And they had to cross through this field. And they started down into the field, and they saw what looked like a campfire up on the hill. And they thought, oh, it's just so-and-so fox chase, that's all it is. And she said they got a little bit further, and it turned into a ball of flame. A huge ball, and it floated off the ground. Well, that spooked them, because they knew then it wasn't a campfire. She said before they could even look away, it winked out, and it was a black figure 3 times as tall as a man. And she said it was twilight. She said she didn't know what it was, but it was solid black. There was no color to it. And it scared them, so they took off. And they crossed a barbed wire fence that she can't even remember crossing. And they got through the part of the field and they came to a gate. And her friend opened the gate, and Grandma ran through, and her friend turned back. And when she did, she said, "My God, Audrey, it's right behind us." And she took off. Grandma turned back to latch the gate, and when she did, it was right there. And she couldn't tell anything. She just said it was solid black. The field they had to go through from the gate was full of boulders and rocks. She said you could not walk through it in the daytime without stumping your toe or stumbling or falling over it. So they ran through it and never went on.
That looks like it hurt.
Like and after that, she never walked. Even if she had to do it out, she wouldn't go to the store. She wouldn't go that way. And then a couple weeks later, she heard about Kathleen May and them, and she knew whatever she saw, it had to be a part of that.
Days after the Flatwoods event had made its way into the public eye, a writer and UFO investigator named Gray Barker would travel to the area to interview key witnesses. Later in life, Barker would again be tied to yet another piece of bizarre West Virginia history when he began his investigations into the Mothman sightings near Point Pleasant. Though Barker is considered to be a questionable resource when it comes to information relating to paranormal subjects, his look at the green monster sightings were eventually published in Fate magazine. where he described in great detail the eyewitness accounts of what transpired that evening in 1952. Barker was joined by Ivan T. Sanderson, a major figure in the study of unexplained phenomena and one of the forefathers of the study of unknown animals, or as it came to be known, cryptozoology. Sanderson would go on to study UFOs and strange creatures for decades, but seemed to take special interest in the Flatwoods Monster. In November of 1956, he would record his radio interview with New York's Long John Neville.
The little Flatwoods at one end of this little valley. It's ringed around by mountains. Now, through this valley runs a road, a blacktop road, going from north to south, also a railway line. And at the opposite end of this little valley, to the village, is a small railroad station. And there is a dirt road that crosses the rail tracks just by that rail station, then curves up around the back of one of these mountains and sort of peels out at a field. And up that road, stuck on the side of this hill, I would say, a very stony hill, are a number of dwellings. One of those houses is occupied by a family by the name of May.
On September 12, 1982, the skies around West Virginia were alive as 6 objects streaked overhead, coming from the north and heading in a southeasterly direction. 4 of the objects were tracked across the U.S. through eyewitness reports and trajectories that took them as far away as Alabama. One of them is said to have exploded in midair somewhere over the nearby town of Gasaway, near the Elk River.
Well, we was at the playground at Flatwoods Grade School, and it was a day about like today, nice out, breeze. While we were playing, we seen this ball of fire come across the sky.
This big flaming thing went over, and it looked like it landed right on the other side of the ridge. So we all went running up to see what it was. Well, you got 5 or 6 boys that are some were in the range of 10 to 17 years old, and you know they're going to go see what happened.
It was Eddie, myself, Neil Nunley, Lee Neal, Gene Lemon, Mother, and Tommy Harr. Tommy Harr was just a little squirt, I guess you would say, at that time, and he was in the back and short. We didn't see it.
But the kids all state categorically that this object, this large glowing object, which appears to be about the size of a house, seemed to pause when it topped the hill and then to sink. Instead of going on down on the sort of trajectory, it stopped and sank slowly down behind the hill, and they could see this light pulsing behind the crest of the hill. And Nunn said, 14-year-old said, come on, let's run up there. Something may have landed, and we'll be able to get something from geological survey, which I think is pretty right.
It wasn't like a shooting star or anything real fast. I mean, it was like floating down, but it looked like a ball of fire, and it come down and over the ridge where you can tell it went down, just over that ridge there, and we knew that land, and there was flat up there, so we said, hey, look at that, you see that shooting star or whatever, hey, it might have gold on it, let's go check it out.
So they made their way up to what is known now as Depot Street and started up the road. We happened to walk right by the house and up the road where he was going, and we picked up my mom, and that's where he was a distant cousin. We were there visiting.
Gene Lemon, he was the older one. He was actually, I think if I remember right, in the Nice Guards at the time.
We just explained to him we saw something looked like it landed up over the hill, and they decided to go with us. The community dog went along for the show, and they started up the trail to the Bailey farm.
Upon landing near the top of the hill at what was then known as the Bailey Fisher Farm, the object could still be seen by the group. Protruding from the earth near the rise, it was clearly visible as they began making their way toward it. What they saw in the distance seemed to be as big as a small house and emitted a strange, glowing orange light. Led by Mrs. May and the visiting Gene Lemon, the band began their ascent up the hill in the direction of the downed object.
until we got up to where there was trees and brush and stuff, and then we slowed down. It was just dusk when we started. The time we got there and in the woods, considerably darker than the open field. And so we slowed down like to a walk.
Going up the hill, we just went up the hill and we didn't know what was going on. Expect what was looking for. We just got up there at a certain point and there it was. They noticed this hissing noise and a fiery object below them, and it turned out to be a shape of an egg or a saucer, and it was hissing and whirling, and that's what they all focused on at first.
They said this thing had landed with the nose, the blunt end down, so it formed not exactly a pair, but it was more like a ace of spades, sort of standing up in the field, sticking up. All around this object there was a thick mist, looked like a ground mist, a patch of it, lying on the side of the hill. But the dog ran into this mist, going barking at this object, according to their story. He immediately set up a howl and took off practically the speed of the light down to the village, and was subsequently found having vomited all over a veranda and subsequently died.
And all at once there was a little noise behind them, and they turned, and there stood the monster.
And then we come to that gate, an old wooden gate, wooden boards, and that's when we seen the thing.
And that's when we saw it, I don't know, maybe half a mile from the house where we was playing football.
They had this flash. They were looking at the object, and then suddenly one of the kids behind said, "Look, up in the tree." Now, there was one oak tree growing isolated right on the top of the ridge. Now, this kid pointed up to this branch, and underneath the branch, apparently suspended in the air, was a creature or a thing, an object, about the size of a very heavy set. But the thing was turning slowly around, waving from left to right, right to left, as if it was searching the horizon with these beams.
He's 12 to 15 foot tall, just kind of hovering or gliding. He's black and green and red in color. His eyes glow with fire or light.
There's a big tree, a big tree, where we seen the number. That's how we estimated 12 feet tall from where it was to the first one on that tree. The tree's dead and gone now.
So what was it like when you actually saw the creature?
Well, when Gene's flashlight beam hit it, it lit up like a Christmas tree. We all noticed it, all at the same time. It wasn't in any bushes. It was right there, under the limb, out in the open, right in the roadway. The whole thing lit up instantly. I was less than 20 feet from the monster. It made a hissing sound, like frying bacon. Gene dropped the flashlight and screamed. He screamed so loud and fell back and stumbled over one of my boys and took off running. It was a hideous sight, and I wish I had not seen it.
They saw something that had the shape of a man, only a lot larger, and creature with claws. You know, they all drew similar pictures later for the press and that sort of thing.
What I saw, it looked like the B-2 rockets that the Germans flew over and hit London. That's what it looked like. Of course, when we saw it, everybody was petrified. You don't remember a whole lot.
The point I want to get across is it was nothing alive, and it was a mechanical thing. It was pointed at the top, and it had portholes, which I said nothing you ever had. It looked like on a ship, porthole, and in behind the porthole, there was light. You could see in behind, but I couldn't see anything. You put this one quick look, it was gone.
I do not have a theory. All I know, it was mechanical. I know it was a little early in history to see something like that, but other than that, I can't explain it.
It's my theory that something landed up there, and they put what they call sentinel down that's the only way exit to get up to that place. They put a sentinel down there.
Apparently, when the flashlight came on, the object tilted over, but the individual came down to concentrate on them, and then immediately began to silently drift through the air, sort of past them, towards them and around to the left, to go down to its left. So scared were they when this thing came towards them. They all took off. And I don't blame them when this thing started to sail through the air towards them.
Well, we wasn't anything till we saw it, and then we was, I don't know what you call it, afraid or confused or what. But everybody just turned around and took off.
And that's when we all went. There was another gate on down next to where the old house used to be. And it was about a 6-foot gate. And people read in the paper where my mother jumped that fence. She was athletic type, but not that athletic type.
We basically ran all the way to the house, and no one said a thing.
Much later on, after a considerable amount of questioning all over the district, we found a farmer who lived on a hill about 3 miles away, but he watched the big object, and he said that for a matter of 10 to 15 minutes it continued to pulse, and it pulsed the same colors, but getting redder and redder and weaker amount of light. And he felt very sure that the whole object itself was diminishing in size. And he said it finally disappeared about 20 minutes later in a pinpoint of light, and then it was complete darkness.
There was a guy that lived on the north, across the valley from that. He seen a thing come in, and he said he seen it take off. And then there was other people that said, well, I seen that thing go through the sky.
Like any good legend, with the passage of time, individuals claiming to have their own connection to the monster have come forward. Chapters are added to the lore, each filled with tales and theories, facts and fables. Over the years, more and more brushes with the bizarre have been recounted by area residents and outsiders alike.
Well, the story goes that George and Edith Snitowski were traveling home. They were from New York, and they traveled to Ohio to visit some relatives, and on their way back, they had some extra time, so they took the scenic route. The route led them over here between Gasaway and Frametown. The car just stalled out for no apparent reason. After trying to start the car several times, they started smelling this strange odor, really noxious, fumed, sulfur-type smell. Well, George, thinking the car was on fire, jumped out of the car to check the engine, popped the hood, couldn't find anything. At the same time this was going on, a really bright flash of light happened, and it was over in the woods next to the road. So he got out, started going towards that light, smell getting worse. He was stumbling and became violently ill. He saw this glowing object in the woods. So he turned away from this object and started stumbling back to the car. At that time, his wife let out a blood-curdling scream. As he's going back to the car, well, he glanced back and saw something that scared the living hell out of him. He ran to the other side of the car, fumbled with the door, jumped back in the car, put his child and wife on the floor, cowering in fear. Then George gave a description of what he saw of the creature as having no legs to be seen, and the lower half being a solid form.
The creature encountered by the Snitowskis on September 13th seems to lend some credence to the theory that multiple objects and strange creatures were visiting West Virginia that night. On September 13th, the National Guard out of nearby Gasaway was dispatched by the Air Force to investigate the mysterious incidents which had taken place the night before.
The original crash site at the Flatwoods Monster, what I find very compelling about that, essentially a crack team of Special Forces personnel from the West Virginia National Guard were sent into that area covertly by the U.S. Air Force. Then Captain Levitt was the man in charge of the Special Forces unit in West Virginia, in the West Virginia National Guard. Now, they were activated almost immediately upon the crash. The group was separated into two teams. Captain Levitt and his men, approximately 50 to 60 strong, were sent into the Fisher farm. The other half of the men were down along the Elk River looking for this supposed aircraft. The team searched all night. Captain Levitt and his group of men did find an impression in the ground that was approximately 20 feet in circumference, where impressions and grass were mowed over, where something apparently had landed on the Fisher farm. Levitt's mission was to collect any type of evidence he could find. He found some type of greased type substance in the grass, smelt the grass during an interview he did. Many years later, when he was now retired Colonel Levitt, he said that the grass smelled of burnt sulfur, and he was ordered to send all the stuff post-haste back to Washington, D.C., to the Pentagon right away.
They called the local sheriff, and he was out on another call that night, similar, down around Frametown or Strange Creek. They had reported that there was a small airplane flew into a hill and burned up, but they couldn't find any evidence that a plane had flew into the hill or that there had been fire. So they investigated that, and then the sheriff, who was Robert Carr, I believe, at the time, he came out and investigated.
I remember going up the next morning, and there's a lot of oil on the ground and some skid marks.
Some of the locals thought, well, you know, it was a farmer. He was up there. There hadn't been any tractor up there. There hadn't been any mowing done.
All the people that was there took pictures of it, took samples of the oil and stuff like that. Never did hear anything back from the samples of the oil, so don't know what that was.
The government gave them some sort of a bogus answer, as usual.
Kathleen May, later in life, told about a mysterious letter which came from the Pentagon shortly after the sighting, which claimed that the UFOs seen on September 12th were merely experimental rockets. Mrs. May couldn't recall the exact details of this letter, but did remember that it ended with a warning to keep quiet and not tell anyone anything about the event. If her recollection of the letter is accurate, then there's little doubt that its writer would be sorely disappointed when just days after the incident, Kathleen May and Gene Lemon, along with the local newspaper editor A. Lee Stewart,
Leave everything to me,
would
Master.
appear
I
in
will
a
not
television
disappoint you.
program called We the People.
Yes, Master.
Their segment on the show also featured the first appearance of Mr. Stewart's rendering of the Flatwoods monster itself, a piece of history which
Mission
today
parameters
still
set.
resides in Flatwoods.
Kathleen May and the Lemon Boy was away in New York on an interview with a TV show.
They was paid, somebody paid for a trip to New York to be on a TV show. That was paid for, but she didn't get paid any money. Everything was paid for.
I watched it, but back then TV was new and it was so snowy you couldn't see much. And the only thing I remember about it was that's where they give it the name of the green-eyed monster.
You know, the Braxton County Monster was always in people's mind, and people were concerned.
You seen something up there, you don't know whether it's still there or whether it left. You know, a few days after that, there was people who was interviewed that seen it take off. I was afraid then. I think we all were.
It was about half and half. About half the people made fun of it, and half the people said they saw things go over and they believed it. So it was pretty much split.
After school, there'd be some kids that would bring it up. The biggest thing that they would say, my mommy and daddy said, that kept them out of trouble, you see. And my mommy and daddy said, y'all made all that up.
In the days to follow the encounter, newspapers across the United States ran articles about a run-in between West Virginia locals and a bizarre, Frankenstein-like, fire-breathing thing. The Green Monster, as it was most commonly referred to, was reportedly anywhere from 7 to 17 feet tall, with a blood-red face. Some articles made mention of the overpowering odor given off by the creature, or the acidic mist which hung in the air around the downed craft and lumbering alien. Many articles quoted Kathleen May as having said that the scent was so pungent that it caused vomiting for hours after the encounter. Even the number of witnesses varied in multiple publications, with many of them ascribing the wrong names to those that were there. The object that was spotted streaking across the sky shortly before its potential pilot was seen was treated as little more than a footnote. The one thing that remained somewhat consistent across the published stories at the time was the encounter itself.
Oh, it's different. It's entirely different what's been reported and written about over the years. Yes, there's a lot of things in there that's not factual.
They want to sell papers. Controversy makes news. You see it more than ever today.
A lot about everybody getting sick and a dog dying and what it had 2 big green eyes and all this, and none of that is true.
We dug out a lot of ground holes with that dog after that.
There was a lot of people that believed that they seen something, and they really believed the story. And then there was an element that opposed the story, that didn't believe anything that anybody said. But there was something happened. And the story has continued over the years. I mean, it hasn't gone away. It's just as prevalent today as it was 65 years ago when the incident happened. It'll be 65 years this fall.
In the years since the encounter with the Flatwoods Monster, multiple interpretations of who or what the creature was, along with its reason for being in the area, have emerged. The frequent, skeptical response is that the Flatwoods Monster was simply an owl, glimpsed sitting on a tree branch, which became a horrifying creature in the wild imaginations of a group of hillbillies. Another theory is that the Flatwoods Monster was only one soldier, which appeared across the U.S. that night, a scout for a coming alien invasion. Drawing parallels to the day the Earth stood still is the idea that the creature seen was simply an innocent visitor to a terrifying and alien planet called Earth, who was welcomed with fear and anger by primitive Earth creatures. The newfound attention on the May family, thanks to their infamous brush with the green monster, proved to be the biggest drawback of the entire event.
In the past, I would say there could have been times in the past where the story could have been in danger of being lost, but I think the way it stands now, I think absolutely not. There's just too many people that found interest in this story, and maybe they've never even set foot in West Virginia, but you can Google everything.
And this story still scares people today because it was passed down generation to generation. When it's passed down like that and it keeps going on and on over generation after generation, it affects
local interest has grown significantly. I've noticed a really increase in civic and local pride surrounding the monster, where maybe 15, 20 years ago you wouldn't have had that.
Kathleen May, the lady that put Flatwoods on the world map, that's important to me. That it's, there is a Flatwoods, West Virginia,
It's not so much whether they believe it or don't believe about it. It's just accepted. It's part of our folklore in Flatwoods, West Virginia.
In recent years, a strange addition to the saga of the Braxton County Monster has been its resurgence in popular culture, appearing in television programs, as children's toys, on album covers, and video games. The creature has found its own version of stardom that it never reached, even at the height of the monster hysteria of 1962. In each new interpretation, small facets of the original creature's description can still be seen, yet it continues to change in its retelling, to evolve, like any good legend does. Braxton has been embraced on a global scale, possibly more so even than in the town that the monster made famous.
It just looks like nothing else. Because of that, and because it's not copyrighted, you can throw it into a game of sloth. So you have this cool looking character that's already been designed for you. And it's been featured in, I know there's a Zelda game where it's featured, and there are several Japanese, maybe Japanese only releases that it's been featured in, like on NES and Super Nintendo, but it's way more than I ever thought there would have been.
They suffered a lot of ridicule. I have personally tried to talk to the May boys about what they saw, and they just wouldn't talk about it. They just didn't want to be an object of ridicule. Pretty much, the witnesses clammed up after the sighting.
I'm like my brother.
Excellent. This ricotta box is key to the ritual. Even one as force-resistant as Ken won't be able to resist the box's pull. He will be imprisoned, and I will finally have this wonderful body to myself. One more thing. Once the ritual has begun, I need you to give me as much of your power as you can, so I can resist the box's pull. Understood?
Won't any power I give to you also go to Kem?
Once the ritual starts, our spirits will be separate enough that it shouldn't matter, as long as I maintain control. Now, let's get started. Yes, it's working. The box is activating. I can feel its pull.
Uderskepiminon.
The monster is too strong. But quick, give me your power or I'll be pulled in.
Do you really think I'm that stupid?
No, I'll kill you! You will regret this!
In piso se waitai spila presin kretai. In pise e wanata atragata injais.
Here, have my strength.
Baru jamunja.
No! What are you doing? We have a deal!
Swaiwai silbans in iswish, paman ik alkas jam, guidis intis isvares.
Is she really trapped?
Iswarim ja algamboze uspalib. Ja uste ans alfras no job. Diabulus afstop fara.
I'd like to forget the whole thing. The only thing that I want to get the word out is actually what we seen. It wasn't a monster. It was a mechanic or something or other. But I would like to publicize it for the town of Flatwoods and for Braxton County and for the state of West Virginia.
I don't really think about it. To be honest with you, I wish it never happened. I wish it never happened, and I wouldn't have to think about it. I wouldn't have to explain to people all the questions I get asked and all that. I'd rather just go away. It's something you can't prove, and it just all comes down to trust, and there's just no point in talking to everybody about it. They got opinions. You're not going to change your opinion one way or the other.
Perhaps it's difficult now to see where it all began. In a small village in the hills of rural West Virginia called Flatwoods, with some kids playing football on an autumn evening, with a family who would become characters in a folk tale they never wanted any part of. Recently, the Bailey Fisher Farm property was bought. The owner has since declared it off limits to the public, and the tree where the sighting took place has rotted and died. In 2009, Kathleen May passed away at the age of 89. And while it is thought that Ron Shaver may still be alive, of the original Braxton County monster witnesses, it is only known as fact that Fred and Ed May still survive. Still, the legend remains. And while kernels of truth are retained in the telling of their story, the events that touch the lives of the May family have become something more, a modern myth.